We're going to pick up at Os Tes. So Os Ches, I'm just actually skipping over. Os Ches, he basically elaborates, he tweaks what he said a little bit more, or just adds actually another detail. He points out that there are, until now we kind of looked at the individual who did a lot of sins and therefore basically have crossed the line. They are not going to live on into the next world. They're going to get reward over here, and they're not going to get any reward in the next world. He points out that there are people who, based on their sins, maybe they are still going to make it to the next world, but they are not going to get all their reward in the next world. Some of their reward is going to be over here because of the nature of their life. In other words, their life was not so bad that they crossed the threshold, that their soul will not live on. Their soul will live on. However, they will not get all the reward in the next world due to the nature of their life being primarily focused on not living a meaningful, spiritual, godly life, and therefore they're going to get a lot of the reward in this world. They'll still make it to the next world, but in terms of reward, only a limited amount of reward will be saved up for them in the next world. So they'll make it in, but they'll be at the nosebleeds, like the last level. They're not going to really make it too far. Okay, so let's now go to Os Tes, where he kind of summarizes what we're talking about over here and introduces the next topic, which we're going to start, God willing, tomorrow. So it says like this: Os Tes, Vulam. However, everything we mentioned until now, we have addressed the fundamental question. The question of why bad people, evil people, prosper in this world, and why good people suffer in this world. Because by explaining these two worlds, it sounds almost simplistic, but it's true. If we believe in two worlds, then to ask the question of, hey, this doesn't seem fair, is asking the question by you've only seen half or a fraction of the story. How can you even ask, oh, it's not fair? It's like, a person goes through some struggling over here. If I tell you I'm going to slap you on the wrist and then give you $1 million, then I'm going to say, oh, it's not fair, you got to slap on the wrist? No one would say that. You say, oh, you're getting $1 million tomorrow. Like, what's the big deal? The point is, we're asking the question based on a very limited perspective. He says, so we've explained that question. We've also explained the spiritual punishment. We've spoken about, Gehenna. We've spoken about a person suffering in the next world in order to get them to Olam Haba. As he says, all this is a preparation for their true reward in the next world. Okay. Well, now what he's going to address, he says, wait a second, this is a little bit scary, because that means if you have anything good in this world, like, how does that work, right? In other words, does that mean there's nothing, that means that anyone who's having a quasi-okay life over here, that means that you are completely not going to be getting any reward in the world to come? Petrifying thought. And it's possible, but he's going to point out there are tzaddikim, there are very righteous people who we could assess and assume that they are truly righteous people, and we're going to assume that they're going to have incredible reward in the world to come, and yet their life's okay, right? How do we explain that? He says we haven't explained that yet. We are going to explain that in the passage to come. In other words, we're not done explaining the entirety of how things work in this world. We've explained one element, but there's still a lot more to explain. Okay, so everything we've been explaining goes according to the second pole. If you recall in the beginning of the section, he spoke about the fact that there are almost like two tracks. There's a track of Olam Haba. There is the idea of we want to get us and the entire world to the next stage of creation, which is there's Olam Hazeh, there's the Messianic era, which we haven't really addressed, and then there's Olam Haba, there's this eternal existence, and that's what we've been focusing on. Then there is the personal. The personal meaning there is the sense of trying to attain a level of perfection independent of the next world. Now we're going to explain that in the section to come. And that is going to be the section of Hashkacha Ishit, or what we call in modern terms Hashkacha Pratis. The individualized providence, that is its own entire section, which we haven't yet addressed, which we're going to address in the section to come. Okay, so that last piece, a little bit of a bridge, pointing out that we are not done. Yes, on the one hand, we've addressed, no one should be, you can ask the question emotionally. We can ask the question, we see someone suffering who is a good person. Emotionally, it's a fair question. It's a fair question. Or, that a person is bothered and troubled by what they see in front of them. But to also recognize that we believe in the next world, and therefore, intellectually, that question shouldn't bother us intellectually, because we understand there is more to the story that we simply don't have access to. So that's what we've been talking about until now, but we still have to explain that there is much more to the picture, and that is what that's going to revolve around the concept of Hashkacha Pratis, which we are going to discuss in the days to come.